Hi, my name is Maria Sousa. I'm the administrator of the Archaeology Program at Boston University. And I'm here with Dr. Jacob Bongers, and he's one of our new faculty from the Society of Fellows. It's a new program that the College of Arts and Sciences has put together. And Jacob is one of the few first ones to become Society of Fellows postdoctoral scholar. What are you looking forward to, Jacob, mostly as a Society Fellow postdoc scholar here at BU?
Thank you for asking that. Well, first of all, I'm just so happy to be here. What I am looking forward to most is, I would say, networking. There is so much intellectual energy in the Boston area. I can't wait to talk more with Mac, David Carballo. Their research interests strongly coincide with mine, so I really cannot wait to talk more about them, about my current research, and making plans for the future. I am very much looking forward to exploring the Boston area. I cannot wait to teach, get to know students here, and to potentially offer them opportunities to participate in research.
Excellent. Where are you from? Is this your first time in Boston? And how are you liking it so far?
Yeah, so I'm from San Jose, California. So I'm a California boy. Uh, and this is technically this is my first time living in Boston. I had been here once before to attend an Andean conference that was held at Harvard. So I spent my first time in Boston in Cambridge, and I really, really like the Cambridge area. So I've spent some time there. Um, and yeah, I mean, so far I really like Boston. Um, I, I'm certainly gearing up for the cold winter months. I've heard about this famous Northeast winter that you guys have here. So I am currently enjoying the very nice weather that we're having now, but I know that is temporary. I'm planning to attend sporting events here. I'm not a huge baseball fan, but I feel like I really need to go to Fenway Park at least once. Um, I'm a big basketball fan. I'm a Lakers fan. But that being said, I feel like I should still go to a Celtics game. Um, so I'm enjoying it so far. I've I've taken a day trip outside of Boston. I went to Salem, which is so far my favorite city um, in this area. Um, so yeah, I am liking it a lot so far. It's
Oh,
been
that's
nice.
wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You're enjoying, in your short time here that you've gone to all these things already and
Yeah.
planning to go to the Celtics games, which is great. They're
Oh yeah.
wonderful. And everything. And yes, the winter months can definitely be challenging,
Oh
but
yeah.
fun, very adventurous.
Definitely. Definitely.
Um, yeah. Um, what are some of your hobbies and interests? What do you like to do in your spare time?
Yeah. So I love to hike. I'm a big hiking fan. So I haven't done any hiking here so far. But I'm certainly making plans. I'm a big movie guy. I really, really like movies. In fact, as soon as I got to Boston, one of the first things that I did was I went downtown and saw Jordan Peele's Nope, which was fantastic. So I love film. Um, I am actually a big gamer. I really enjoy playing games, and I have since I was a kid. And it's definitely one of those interests that just hasn't really passed me by. So I love that, and I'm also, a bit of a tech gadget guy. I love technology. I love drones. Um, Anything that has to do with gadgets or gear, or field work prep. A lot of people that know me well know that I'm just a gear guy. Like, I love talking about gear and pre preparing for field seasons. So yeah.
Oh, well, that's great. I'm sure the students will really latch on to know all of your interests. It sounds
Definitely.
like, it's a lot of the students love gaming and all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we do have a great Blue Hills reservation. They have great hiking down there,
Okay.
Canton, so that's an option that you might want to think about.
Fantastic.
Um,
Fantastic.
so tell us about your research interests.
Mm.
What did you work on previously?
Yeah, so for my thesis, I looked at mortuary practice and imperial conquest in the Chincha Valley of southern Peru. So if you've heard of the Nazca lines, the Chincha Valley is just north of there. And I used a variety of methods here: excavation, survey, geospatial mapping, drone archaeology, to investigate this really dense mortuary landscape in the Chincha Valley. So we mapped over 500 tombs. So it's a very, very dense landscape. And the key question that I had, that I posed for this thesis was, how does imperial conquest change how local peoples treat their dead? And we made some fascinating finds here. We documented two different types of tombs. We've got these mausolea, these sort of these large mausolea mausolea that are known as cholpas, and we have these smaller scale subterranean tombs that we found. And we found that tomb use changed, and how these people treated their dead also changed, and coincided with both the Inca conquest as well as the Spanish conquest. And one of the most interesting finds that we made, is that local peoples mounted human vertebrae on reed posts. And this was something that is a very striking feature of this mortuary landscape. And so we gathered data on these remains, dated them, and so forth, and we found that they actually coincided with the late Inca period and the early colonial period, which is when the Spanish would have been looting a lot of these tombs. And so one of the main arguments that I make in my thesis is that the mounting of human vertebrae on posts, this type of post-mortem treatment of the dead, was an act of resistance against imperial control, and was a response to Spanish looting. So it was a wonderful time to work on this thesis and to think about the dynamics between mortuary practice and imperial conquest. And right now, my main interests are shifting towards conflicts, climate, and community. And so it's a fairly different project that I'm sure I'll tell you more about later.
Okay, well, that leads to my next question, and that would be, what is your current research project about?
Ah, perfect. So
You know what I was thinking about.
there it is, right? Yeah, so my current project. So I'm currently looking at how communities in highland and coastal Peru managed risks of conflicts and droughts and El Nino in their everyday lives. So I will be focusing on two large fortified towns. One that is in Ancash, and then a second that is in the Pisco Valley, which is just south of the Chincha Valley, which is where I carried out my doctoral research. And this is, like my thesis, going to be very much an interdisciplinary project. We're going to use a variety of methods. We're going to use drones, GPS devices to map out both of these sites. We are going to excavate households to learn about domestic practices. We're going to be analyzing soils from terraces to learn about land use and so forth. And one thing that I forgot to mention here is that both of these periods of these sites date to one of the most turbulent periods in Peru's history, which is known as the late intermediate period. And this is roughly 1000 to 1400 CE. And this was an incredibly, incredibly challenging and harsh period because you have intensified conflict, drought, and El Nino that is intertwining to produce this incredibly challenging and harsh landscape. And this was a period of widespread conflict. Everyone's fighting each other. There's a lot of competition over resources. People are settling on hilltops. So it's an incredibly harsh period. And what this project is setting out to do is to learn about the lifeways of people that lived in some of these fortified towns. How did they make it? How did they get by in this period where you have violent threat and you have drought and El Nino that is posing major challenges to your livelihood. So we really want to learn about how these communities coped with these challenges in their everyday lives. And we want to connect our findings to contemporary risk management practices through community engagement. And what we want to do there is we want to hold workshops that involve community members, policymakers, and researchers. And we want to bring our findings into dialogue with how contemporary peoples in Peru are dealing with El Nino and drought. And we're hoping that these synergies of different types of knowledge and different types of people can enhance capacity building policies for dealing with climate change.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting. How did you become interested in these topics and in archaeology?
Thank you for asking that. Wow. So, oh my gosh. So I've been into archaeology ever since I was a kid, and I know that I'm not alone. I feel like many archaeologists have this kind of story. So yeah. So since I was young, I've been into this. And where it started. I have a family in Holland, and I spent a lot of time there when I was younger, and now my grandfather was an avid he really loved Roman history, and so he would take me to all these Roman sites and so forth. And one of the ways how I got into archaeology was I'm a little ashamed to say this, but it was actually through detecting. So we we would go um, we would we would go metal detecting in the countryside, and we would actually find Roman objects and so forth, which again, is very much frowned upon now. But it got me. I loved this. I loved finding things, and so since that time I was obsessed with this field, and I actually went on my first dig when I was 16 years old, and this was in Portugal. And on that dig, I actually found a Roman coin. So, and from that moment on, I was hooked. I was hooked. Um, how I got into Andean archaeology. So when I was in college, I wanted to initially study Roman archaeology or Mediterranean archaeology. And I took this course uh, on Andean archaeology, and it changed my life in a way, and I learned about this region of extremes. There's so much, it's such an extreme environment. You've got earthquakes, volcanoes, El Nino, all of these environmental challenges there, and learning about how these different cultures in the Andes thrived and mitigated a lot of these challenges really stuck with me. And I was also really drawn to how there's still so much mystery in the Andes. Um, there's still a lot of major questions that have not been answered there. And so I worked on a field school in Chile after my freshman year and loved it. And then after that, I worked on a survey project in the Titicaca Basin in Peru. And from that point on, I knew, wow, I really want to work in Peru. And I've been working there for 10 years,
Wow,
which is absolutely wild.
that's great. So you were there over the summer as well?
I was, yeah. So I was there this past summer, and this was the first time that we had carried out field work in Peru since 2019. This is when I was a postdoc at the Sainsbury the Sainsbury Research Unit. Yeah, so this was the first time that we had worked in Peru since 2019. And I was working at an early site called Pashash. Very, very cool palatial complex with monumental with very, very large walls, and it's an amazing site. And that project is led by my supervisor at the time, George Lau. And during that season, I was able to carry out field work for my current project, and I was able to do my favorite thing in the world, which is to fly drones. So I was able to, and in fact, I can show pictures
Yeah, that's great.
of this, right? Is
Yeah,
that okay?
absolutely. We'd love to see it.
So I'll share the screen.
Yes.
Share the screen. And so I'll show a photo. Let's see here. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So this is the Highland site that I'm working at. That's known as Mashgonga. And this is an aerial shot of the site. And I've got a photo of me flying my drone right here. So this is at the top of the site.
I don't see you
And
with the drone.
oh, you don't. Let me see here. I think I have to reshare the screen. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, now we
There we go. Okay. Okay, so there's that photo, and then let's see. And I'll stop sharing again. And yeah, so it was only for about 11 days. And our main goals for the season were to produce a map of the entire site. The whole site is at least 29 hectares in size. And so our goal was to produce a map of the site and to identify contexts that we could potentially dig next year. And so we were able to do that. And what was really, really cool is I was able to automate the flight, which is fantastic. So we took a ton of photos of the site, but the photos that I actually used to make the maps of the site, I think we took around 500 shots. And I can actually show you what we were able to produce. So I'll share the screen again, and I'll show you. Let's see here. Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you can see that? Okay. So this is great. Okay, perfect. So this is a large image of the site. So you've got sectors here, sector there, big sector here, and then you've got this sort of hilltop plaza space right here. And you have this it's at least 1,200-meter long wall that surrounds the entire site right here. You can see that right there. And I can also show you a DEM of the site. So this is an elevation model of the site, and you can really see the site now. And you can see that very, very, very long wall. It's right here. There's also a wall right there. And these little squares here, we think are mostly households and maybe some patios and so forth. And we are planning to next year dig a few of the contexts that you see here. So this is the sector that we're going to focus on. So thousands of people lived at this site. So this is definitely what we would call a fortified town. So we're very happy. So, this was not really like a full season of work. I would say it was more of a pre-season, but we got some fantastic data on the site, and we now have a better understanding of the layout and function of the site.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It really is. Awesome. All right, now for the real serious stuff. What do you plan on teaching here at BU?
Ah, yes. Okay. So I will be teaching in the spring, and the course will be on Andean archaeology. And it's going to be, which is really funny to say because, this was the course that changed my life. Of course, I didn't teach the course then, but this is the course that I took back in college that really changed my life. So it's really nice knowing that I will be teaching this in the spring. And basically, it's going to be a survey course. We are going to be looking at all of the major cultural periods in Andean history, focusing mostly on Peru. And so, we're going to be talking about all these incredible uh, societies and cultures. We're going to be talking about the Tiwanaku, the Inca. Where we'll talk about the colonial period. We're going to be learning about how these cultures, what made them so vibrant. Um, what was the makeup of these kinds of societies? How did they adapt to the incredibly challenging Andean environment? Um, so I'm excited to teach this in the spring.
Excellent. We are excited to have you teach it for us in the spring. Thank you.
Fabulous.
So you're writing a book. So can you tell us a little bit more about the book that you're writing right now?
Oh my gosh, I am writing a book. Yes. So the book manuscript. So I will be turning my PhD thesis into a book. So basically the book is based on my thesis work. So I'm looking at mortuary practices and imperial conquest. And what I'm trying to do with the book, my current thinking right now is I'm going to primarily draw upon the data that we gathered in the Chincha Valley for my doctoral thesis. We're going to be focusing on that as a case study, but I'm going to be looking at other cases around the world that deal with how imperial incursions by foreign empires changed how local people treat their dead. And one of the goals of the book is to try and produce a theory of mortuary practice and imperial conquest. How can we theoretically approach this? How can we use the patterns and data and findings on this topic to produce a sort of new theory on death rituals and imperial conquest? A lot of imperialism studies focus on how empires economically extract resources from the peoples that they control. And there's been some discussion on how imperial interventions impacted how local peoples carry out rituals. But there has not been as much of a focus, I would say, on mortuary practices, which is interesting because mortuary practices, there's been a ton written about why mortuary practices and any rituals of the dead, why they're so important, why they played such key roles in the social lives of Andean peoples. The dead were played very, very key roles in how Andean peoples conceived of their social and cosmological worlds. They played very, very key roles there. So this was an incredibly, how people deal with their dead is an incredibly important cultural practice, not just in the Andes, but of course around the world. And many would say that how we that mortuary rituals are what make us human, are in part what make us human, right? So focusing on this practice and seeing how it tracks with imperial conquest, with an incredibly challenging and turbulent event that can upset social orders with how people carry out cultural practices, seeing how mortuary practice, how these local practices changed through conquest can really tell us a lot about about the dynamics between empires and local peoples. It's a mortuary perspective on how empires and local peoples, their dynamics, basically.
Oh, wonderful. Sounds like it's going to be a great book. What do you have any particular experiences or memories from when you were a graduate student that stood out in your mind?
I loved being in LA. I love the hot water. I love being able to go to the beach whenever I wanted. That was really nice. That was really, really nice. I loved being in LA. I had a wonderful time at the Coatsen Institute. I was there for a few years and then moved to Baltimore to write my thesis. But I really owe tremendous thanks to my supervisor then, Chip Stanish. I had a wonderful cohort that was incredibly supportive. In terms of like specific memories, I mean, what I really enjoyed was attending pizza talks. So the Coatsen is famous for having these pizza talks where they invite people to come by, give a talk, and there is pizza there, and we had so many of these talks, and it was just such a wonderful way to learn about the other research that people are doing, and of course to have pizza, right, which was very, very nice.
Plus,
So so that was a wonderful time. One of and I just love field work. I love field work, so going down to Peru and gathering more data on my thesis. Of course there were ups and downs. I wasn't quite sure how this thesis was going to shape up. But what I found so exciting was each year going down to Peru, carrying out field work in the Chincha Valley, and every day going out there and learning something new, mapping more tombs, finding different artifacts that I hadn't found before, coming back, thinking about it, and it was just it was such a cool process of developing ideas for the project. It was really great. Now looking back, of course, it can be a very anxious time, but looking back now, sort of seeing how the field work, going out there and learning more about these mortuary practices, it was just great to add more and more pieces to the puzzle and to just gain a clearer picture of how these peoples treated their dead. So it was really fascinating. So my fondest memories, I would say, concern the field work. I just really love doing field work in the Chincha Valley, and it's been a while since I've been back there, but I hope to go back soon.
Oh, excellent. Okay, do you have any advice for undergraduates and graduate students that you'd like to share with us?
Definitely, definitely. I would say the number one point of advice would be to just love your project. It's so important to really, really like your project. And, this is something that carried me forward, is through the ups and downs and the uncertainties and so forth. What really got me through was I've been really interested in mortuary practices in the Andes for many, many years, and finding this kind of project was lucky, of course. But I really wanted to do this topic. I really wanted to explore this topic, and what got me through was just wanting to see it through, wanting to see where the narrative was going to go. And so I just really, really enjoyed the thesis topic. I'm really fortunate and really happy to be writing a book on it now. And so I would say to students out there to just, take the time to explore different topics, take courses, and learn about what you can do. And then as soon as you find that topic that that you really care about, that you're extremely interested in, create a project on it, and I just feel like that is really such a strong force that can push you through what is, on one level, a very challenging period, right? So yeah, so I would say pick a topic, pick a project that you truly, truly care about, and enjoy the process. Enjoy the process of of learning.
Well, thank you, Jacob. I think that's great advice. And with that, this ends our interview. And I want to say thank you very much for coming to BU. We're very excited to have you, to collaborate with you, and for you to share your research with us. And have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you.
This was great.